Are you someone who is into podcasts? Perhaps you want to have a really cool library where you can find some great podcasts to listen to on your commute to work. Or maybe you're looking to create one yourself. Well, let me tell you about Anchor. It's the easiest way to make a podcast, all right? It's free. It has creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your PC. Anchor will also distribute your podcast for you. Complete ease, hassle-free, so that way you can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, as well as many more outlets. You can also make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Okay, folks? Everything you need to make a podcast in one place. It's fantastic, all right? And if you want to get started right now, all you got to do is download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Hello, friends. I am back with a pretty interesting topic for you this week. Now, this is one that you went ahead and you voted for on my Twitter. So I hope you guys enjoy it. This one will be a controversial topic. There's going to be many of you that are going to strongly disagree, and that's fine. This one I'm hoping is going to make you all think, and maybe you'll formulate some new opinions about how things are based on what you end up hearing today, which is my main goal. I want to be able to impact you guys in a way to where you'll either start thinking about things in a different way, or maybe you'll so strongly disagree with me that regardless of which way you go, whether you agree or disagree, maybe you'll reach out to me and we can have some dialogue. That'll be pretty awesome. Share your thoughts. All right, so we're going to be talking about my Xbox domination theory, and this wraps into how Microsoft does their business practices. And many of you probably have not heard of this before, but Microsoft actually uses a strategy known as the Triple E method. Now, that stands for embrace, extend, and extinguish. The last E, extinguish, was formerly known as innovate. All right, so for you all to get a better understanding of how Microsoft uses this strategy, I kind of want to go into more detail about what it is, and then I'll go over some background on how they've applied it in the past, and which has allowed Microsoft to become the powerhouse that they are today. So the Triple E method is used by Microsoft, and it's their strategy for entering a product market that has widely used standards. They then will extend those standards with proprietary capabilities, and then they will use those differences to disadvantage their competitors. Now we're going to go into more, like I said, the background. We have to go way back to the early 90s, where Microsoft was really putting their foot into the arena, so to speak, and spreading themselves out, take over multiple markets. Let's go back to 1994. Now, back then, there was this memo that was written by Jay Allard. You'd be like, who the heck is that? Well, Jay Allard, at the time, was the Chief Technology and Experience Officer within the Entertainment and Device Division for Microsoft. Now, he had wrote a memo to the Vice President of Microsoft of the time, Paul Merritz. It was entitled Windows, the next killer application on the internet. What this memo did was it proposed a strategy to turn Windows into the next killer app. And if you guys stop and you think about it, Windows is exactly that. It is the end-all be-all application. It is the number one used operating system worldwide. That didn't happen overnight. Okay, they put a lot of planning into how to make Windows take over and squash their competition. Go back to 1995. At the time, you had Windows, Mac, and Linux. Microsoft is the dominant operating system. It's more widely used across the world than any other OS. In order to better understand the triple E method, you have to understand that that includes 3 phases, embrace, extend, innovate, or nowadays extinguish, however you want to use it. Those are different phases. All right, so we have to get an idea of how these are going to apply. Phase 1 is to embrace. So basically, enter the market. Okay, you have to enter the market. Now, there are multiple different markets that Microsoft has tapped into over the years. And I'm going to go into how Microsoft used the triple E method within their history, certain moments to get where they are today and to basically monopolize and take over. We have the operating system, okay, the Windows OS, which is, like I said, the most widely used application across the world. PCs are everywhere. Everybody has a PC in their workspace, at their school, or at home. Windows is everywhere. It is the #1 operating system, hands down, no question. It is. That is a fact. Now, where else did they use the triple E method? They had used it. If you go way back to the early 90s, now some of you may be too young for this. If you go back to the early 90s, you may remember there was a period where when the internet came around, we had the creation of browsers as well as messengers. Now, I'm not going to be covering these in order of how they happened. I'm just going to cover them. Now, I'm going to start with messengers. At the time, AIM or AOL were the big ones. Okay, AOL was everywhere, and you couldn't even turn around or blink an eye without getting an AOL, trial disc in the mail. All right, they were just super heavily marketing AOL. Everybody knew what AOL was. Okay, so what Microsoft did is they wanted to, compete with that and create their messenger, which was MSN, to compete against AOL. And they did. They used the triple E method, and because of that, AOL doesn't even exist anymore. They're gone. And MSN was the dominant messenger during the time. I mean, yes, you can all argue, well, that's no longer the case. Yes, times have changed. Now we have Facebook and Google and other competitors that I would argue are the top messengers of today. But we're talking about when they used this. So back when they applied this method, those companies didn't exist yet. So they used it to take out AOL and make MSN one of the bigger messengers that everybody would use. Next, there were the browser wars. You're like, browser wars? Yeah, the browser wars. It's a real thing. Everyone today talks about, oh, we have the console wars. But I feel like you all forgotten that before the console wars were the browser wars. All right, so you're like, what? So let me go into the browser wars. There were companies alongside Microsoft that were introducing proprietary compliant extensions. So if you go back to 1995, during the browser wars, we had competitors, Microsoft with Internet Explorer, you had Apple with Safari, Mozilla had Firefox, Opera Software had the Opera browser, and they basically were competing over who was going to have the top browser that everybody was going to use. And things got pretty dirty during the browser wars. Microsoft used the triple E method to become pretty underhanded, which allowed them to, at the time, Internet Explorer was the most widely used browser of the time. Like, once again, this doesn't apply to today. People don't even use Explorer really anymore. Everyone uses things like Google Chrome. We're just talking about during the 90s, during the browser wars. Those were the contenders. All right, Apple, Mozilla, Opera Software, and Microsoft. Oh, and also Netscape. I forgot about Netscape. Netscape's really important. Okay, so now the browser wars were a combination. The browser wars were basically a competition for dominance between the different web browsers during the late 90s. That was the first browser war. All right, and it pitted. So back then we had Microsoft with Internet Explorer, we had Netscape's Navigator, we had Mozilla's Firefox, we had Apple had Safari, and Opera Software had Opera, and they were going into all these. Scratch all that. Okay. So the browser wars took place in the first browser war anyway. We're just going to talk about the first browser war because this is still continuing today. But the very first browser war during the late 90s was between Microsoft's Internet Explorer and Netscape's Navigator browsers. The way that Microsoft ended up, they had to extend. So now they had to, winning is by using the EEE method. All right, so they embraced the market with making a web browser, create different services to spread out their browser. During 1995, the World Wide Web, they ended up getting a lot of attention within pulp culture and mass media. Netscape Navigator was the most widely used web browser at the time, and Microsoft had licensed Mosaic to create Internet Explorer. Then later on, they ended up creating Internet Explorer 2.0, which they released a free download to 3 months later. Netscape's Navigator was not available to anybody who was using Windows for free. At least not to everyone. So now you had a thing where you could be like, okay, I have a Windows PC. Which are you going to choose, right? So then other companies had to follow suit and they had to start releasing their browsers for free in order to compete. They were super focused on how they could better develop their browsers, and then it became a thing where they were constantly churning out the latest updates of the browser. Netscape had JavaScript and Microsoft had JScript, so then they ended up having issues with the proprietary of HTML tags, and then Internet Explorer ended up beginning to approach by offering a scripting known as cascading style sheets. You guys might better know that as CSS, back in like 96. Then, in order for promotion and advertising of which browser was best to use, web designers started displaying that their sites would be best viewed if you were using Netscape, or they were best viewed if you had Internet Explorer. That basically created where you had to pick and choose which browsers to use based on what sites you were going to use and things like that, and it became crazy. So the response to this was the viewable with any browser campaign that was created, which basically said that websites would have to be compliant with the World Wide Web's consortium standards and be viewable with any browser, versus being, okay, we are better viewed on Netscape or better on Explorer. Now they had to make their stuff work and be equal amongst all browsers. And then to continue with the competition, Microsoft kept bundling Internet Explorer with every single copy of Windows that they were selling, which allowed them to get a lot more users using their browser than Netscape, who didn't have an operating system. They had to, they basically had to either give away their product for free and not have any other products around it to back it up, like Microsoft had their operating system to back it up, or they would have to, have people pay a fee to use their product. Now, this ends up going back and forth until 1998, where there was the antitrust case. All right, so we had the antitrust case where it involved the ex-president of Intel, Stephen McGeady, Paul Maritz, and Jay Allard had a phase that they used within Microsoft to kill HTML, and by their way of extending it, and then having the intention to extinguish and basically remove their rival Netscape by cutting off their air supply, so to speak. Basically, they said that they were giving away a clone product for free. Internet Explorer was a clone of Netscape's Navigator, and Microsoft was giving away for free within their thing as their way of taking out their competition. McGeady also claimed during his testimony that Paul Maritz described in the meeting at Intel that Microsoft had a plan to embrace Extend Extinguish, the HTML standard, until it would be incompatible with Netscape's browser. So that would be the final phase. Embraced the market, so they created their product within there, which was Explorer, to compete against Netscape's Navigator. Then they extended it by putting it within all of their copies of Windows. So anybody who bought a PC would get Internet Explorer for free. That allowed them to extend in the market further and get a further reach that Netscape couldn't compete with. And then the final phase was to extinguish. So now they made plans to basically make the HTML incompatible with Netscape, so that way Netscape could no longer use it. So now that would further force everyone to switch over to Explorer and stop using Netscape's browser. This ends up leading into the second browser war. Okay, so where Microsoft continues to do what they've been doing since the first war, and inevitably they succeed. Netscape ends up having to pack up their bags and call it quits, and they ended up I believe they went out of business, or at least stopped pushing their browser and everything back in 2003. Microsoft won that battle. Okay, now another way that Microsoft used the EEE method was when it came to Java, and they ended up getting into there were some more concerns and legalities and things about Microsoft pushing to make Java would no longer have any portability within the cross platforms and things. And they did that by creating JDirect. Okay, so JDirect was seen as Microsoft's attempt to undermine Java's cross-platform capabilities, and it is a prime example of the tactic of they embrace, extended, and then extinguished. And you may also remember Visual J++. This is going to be for those of you who are super tech savvy. JDirect was a way for Microsoft to become dominant by growing within the Java's community. Okay, so Microsoft and Java already had their predefined classes like user32 and kernel32 APIs. So then Microsoft implemented the framework called JDirect, which provided a base mechanism that allowed the J++ applications to circumvent Java's class libraries and API media. Pretty much now Java had a choice to make, because now, you know, Microsoft once again, they embraced, they've extended, and now they're extinguishing by making it to where Java has to basically conform. They either have to go along with what Microsoft is doing so that they can stay relevant, or be crushed. So they conform. And that becomes so that's why you have like the creation of Microsoft's, the Microsoft Java virtual machine within the Windows API. It allowed Microsoft to have Java implemented within Windows, and it would circumvent Java's native interface. So now they basically rendered them useless and replaced them. They took what Java had, replaced it, made it obsolete, and forced them to be like, okay, now you are part of Microsoft. Let's see here. I'm not going to go into crazy details on some of these other ones just because I feel like I've given you a decent amount of examples already, but I just want to kind of throw some more out there real quick. Some other examples would be with email. Microsoft ended up using their triple E method for email to become the dominant force within email. So if you actually stop and think about it, Microsoft's Outlook is the dominant email that is used. If you go to pretty much any business, if you go to look at your job or go to any business, what are they 9 times out of 10, what are they going to be using? Outlook. Businesses worldwide are going to be using Outlook, and there's a lot more of them than there are the few, let's say Americans that are going to use Gmail for a personal. There's a lot more businesses around the world that are using Outlook, so it makes them the dominant email. There have been concerns with Adobe. Adobe has even felt threatened by Microsoft implementing the triple E method against them. There's GitHub. GitHub is pretty prominent today, right? GitHub is basically controlled by Microsoft. And then there's Linux. Linux, was a competitor that now had to adopt Microsoft's open source strategy. And basically now Linux, even though they want to say they're their own thing, they're basically under Microsoft's thumb. There's even Blender. For those of you that work with like 3D animations or images and making like AIs and things, with Blender, Microsoft has now teamed up with Blender and did more open sourcing and gave them free access, so that way Blender could feel like they are being better utilized. Microsoft loves tricking companies into using things like open source or free. Like we mentioned before, when it came to the browsers, they had the browsers for free. When it comes to Linux or Blender and other companies out there, they'll use free open source as their way to lure companies in, so that way they can extend, and then they will go and they'll change the features within to where they can squash their competition, to where the competition will either just disappear, or they will have to choose to conform and be ruled by Microsoft. I know that's a lot of like super technical stuff that probably went over a lot of your guys' heads, and I'm hoping I explained it decently. I'm not the most tech savvy either. I had to do my research to make sure I had everything fact checked. So that gives us a background on how Microsoft uses the triple E method repeatedly for pretty much everything they get involved in. Now we're going to go into the heart of everything, and why you're here is my theory for Xbox. Now here's something I didn't mention. Now you remember how I talked about Jay Allard, the Chief Technology Experience Officer for Microsoft, and how he's the one that basically created the Embrace, Extend, Extinguish, or Innovate method that we've been going over? Well, guess what? This individual is also one of the founding members of Xbox, and Xbox 360, and Xbox Live. So, now we're going to have you guys stop and think a little bit. So you mean the father of Triple E created Xbox? And you're going to and people are going to sit here and argue that there's no way that the triple E method is being applied to such a thing? Think again, my friends. Now, this is where we're going to go into more detail about what those phases were that I mentioned. Because you're going to be like, well, you mentioned there were these phases and you kind of went over them, but you didn't really go into that much detail, right? Well, let me go ahead and do that for you. All right, so during that 1994 memo that Allard created when they wanted to make Windows basically take over the internet and be the #1 used OS, they had the 3 phases. Now, the first phase, which is embrace. Now, this is what he wrote on the memo. I'm going to basically be quoting the memo, and then we'll go over how this applies today. All right, so phase 1 was embrace. He wrote, all participants need to establish a solid understanding of the infrastructure and the community, determine the needs and the trends of the user base. Only then can we effectively enable Microsoft system products to be great internet systems. Now stop and think about that. This is where it goes into play with Xbox. He's one of the founding members that created Xbox. So basically, they wanted to embrace the gaming market. They saw that gaming, was trending. It was successful. It was making a lot of money. It was profitable. So they wanted to get into this market. So Allard and the other founding members got together and they created Xbox. That was phase 1, to embrace. They got into the market. They created the Xbox gaming console. All right. And remember how they said they had to establish an understanding of the infrastructure as well as the community so they can, determine the needs and the trends of the user base? You can't argue that the original Xbox didn't do just that. Now, the original Xbox entered the console wars. Microsoft entered the arena with the original Xbox, and they were going up against Sony's PlayStation 2, Nintendo's GameCube, and Sega's Dreamcast. They made sure that when they put out that console, that they had a good understanding of what the gaming community needed, as well as what was trending and what they wanted, so that they could capture that user base. And so they ended up they ended up creating games that would pull people in, like Halo. So now they're in the market. That was phase 1. Phase 2, according to his 94 memo for Windows, is extend. Establish relationships with the appropriate organizations and corporations with goals that are similar to ours. Offer well-integrated tools and services compatible with established and popular standards that have been developed in the internet community. That is where we are right now. We are in phase 2. Phase 2 has been going on for quite a while. I would say Xbox 360 is where they really started pushing into phase 2. And we're still in phase 2 today. Okay? So, establish relationships with appropriate organizations and corporations with similar goals to ours. All right? Clearly, they are doing that. So, they created Xbox Live. Okay? They then created Game Pass. Game Pass is a way for them to bring games into their market and help out other organizations, other development studios and publishers get their stuff out there. And they are establishing that within popular standards and things that are developed, because they're now Game Pass is not only just on the Xbox console, it has expanded over to the PC side, and it's going into the mobile side with xCloud. So now they're tapping into more popular standards and organizations that have similar goals, and that is the mobile market. All right, so now they teamed up with Android. They tried teaming up with Apple, but Apple didn't want to play ball. And it's funny because everybody has known Microsoft to use the triple E method for so long. And now everybody just wants to ignore it and act like they're not doing it anymore, even though they know they're still doing it. And they're just ignoring it, thinking, ha ha ha, no, that's not really happening anymore, when it really is. And you'll see it with, right now, how they're in phase 2. Look at how the console wars are reshaping. So that leaves the 2 biggest competitors, Nintendo and Sony, who are still playing the game the same way that they've always have, where they just focus on just making a console, making sure their console is more powerful than the previous one, making sure it offers a couple more features than the previous models, as well as making sure they have exclusive titles that they can only be played on their systems only. That's the method that they've been using successfully for a long time. And while they've been doing that, they have been letting Microsoft do what Microsoft does best, and that is extend themselves outside of the market to where they can, get a much larger user base. So now they have their other extension, which is xCloud, which is allowing them to put their product into the market and get even more users that may not already have, let's say, an Xbox console. Now people who have an Android can get Game Pass, and now they can play those games right there on their mobile devices, whether it's their tablet or their phone. So they're still extending. Now phase 3, according to the 94 memo, was written as move into a leadership role with new internet standards as appropriate, enable standard off-the-shelf titles with internet awareness. Change the rules. Windows becomes the next generation internet tool of the future. So basically, to apply that to the console wars, they're going to want to move into the leadership role, so that Xbox extended their reach so far that now they can go ahead and they can stifle and smother and demolish their competition, because now they've reached further than what their competition did, because their competition let them do it. They weren't paying attention. So that allows them to further reinstate their dominance within the market. Yes, you may not be someone who has the Xbox console, but that's not their goal. Their goal isn't to be limited to just a console. They're looking to dominate as a brand, to become a household name. If they have people who are using something within the Xbox intellectual property, whether, yes, you have the gaming console, or maybe you're using Game Pass on PC, or maybe you have xCloud. So now you're playing games on mobile. So even if let's say you own a PS4, so you can have your Sony thing, but guess what? Now you can be like, I can do Xbox on my PC that I also have, or you can be like, you know what? I'm not a PC gamer, but I am a console gamer, and I happen to have a phone. So now you can be like, well, I don't want to do the PC route. I'm going to keep my PlayStation, but now I can tap into Xbox through my mobile. So it allows them to get their reach into consumers that would have been only using Sony's product. So now they're basically saying, okay, Sony consumers are also our consumers. And then they can go and make it to where, hey, we have all these great features. We have Game Pass, xCloud, Xbox Live, Xbox Games with Gold, all these great services. And once again, they like to use the stuff free. You have Xbox Live, you get your gold games for free. They expand it to where now they're more than a console. They're on PC, they're on mobile. They have their game bar on PC, so now you can literally just use game bar on PC and you can still chat with your friends that are on Xbox. They had their Smart Glass app, which allowed people to control their Xbox with their phone as a remote. They have numerous, and then they have their marketplace and numerous other apps that people could use to make Xbox more user friendly and adaptable within their daily life. And instead of it just being a system that catered to gaming, they expanded to make it something that you would use in your everyday life. So that's why with Xbox One, they really pushed, hey, you can play music, you can watch movies, we have Blu-ray on here, we have 3D capabilities on here. You can go ahead and you can connect your satellite or your cable provider up to it. And, you know, to really show that they are a all-inclusive, end-all be-all entertainment system that you can use for anything in your day-to-day life. You have kids that are gamers, great, they can play games. If, you know, mom wants to watch, you know, TV, she can do that still through the Xbox, and she can get access to apps to watch Netflix and other things in case you don't have a smart TV to provide those to you. It opens up to where people who aren't gamers can use their products as well. And then with these features, it becomes a part where they will go so far as to, like they've done in the past, make it to where their competition has to use them or adapt to them. Now, Sony is already in bed with Microsoft. Sony uses Microsoft for security because their PlayStation got hacked so many times, so they had to go to Microsoft to get help with security. Sony uses Azure and things because Sony makes PCs, and they use Microsoft's infrastructure for those PCs. So what's going to stop Microsoft from extending so far to where they're going to be like, hey, Sony, if you want to keep going, you have to use our systems and features or be crushed. So you have to either conform or die. Really think Sony's going to choose to, you know, go tits up? No. They will conform like everybody else does. And eventually, they will be under their thumb. Just like, or they'll just be the smaller name, like Apple. More people use Windows than Mac. It'll become a point to where Xbox services will be extended so far, there will be more people using Xbox branded features than owning a PlayStation. So that's how they're going to dominate. That's how they're going to win the console war, because they're playing a whole different ball game. They're more than a console. They're a freaking lifestyle. Look at Google. Look at Amazon. They are more than just a shopping website or a browser. They have devices in your home that you can interact with. You know, your Alexa or your Echo Dots, Google phones. Google uses the same EEE method that Microsoft created. No one's over here saying, you know, trying to stop Google from monopolizing the same way Microsoft is. Microsoft has done it successfully time and time again. They are still doing it today with Xbox. Everybody's ignoring it and letting it happen. And once Phase 3 comes in, it's going to be pretty damn interesting. Especially when people who are hardcore Sony fanboys get that cruel realization. We let Xbox take over our property, open up the gate and let them and had them come right on in and take over everything. It will be interesting. Alrighty guys, thank you so much for listening. If you have any comments, please leave them here on Anchor, or you can send me messages on Twitter. I'd love to hear from you. Hit that follow button. Please share it with your friends and family. Follow me on my social media. Just search Cool Cat Terry. Thank you for listening to this. I hope it made you think. Whether you agree or disagree, I would love to hear some feedback on what you think is going on. And I wish you all the very, very best. Thank you again.